Hi, Brian. Love your videos and your store. Great store. Well, thanks, Janet. I bought several fountain pens, inks, converters, etc. I'm just getting into fountain pens and have about 8 so far. I've asked in a previous post about the difference in the nibs between the Platinum Plaisir and the Platinum Balance. Then I saw your video on the Platinum Cool and its ability to flex somewhat. How does a cool nib compare to the other two? If the looks of the Balance in green, but also, or you like the look of the green, but also demonstrators. Okay, cool. So, yes, the Balance, I got a few things to clarify here. You talk about the Balance and the Plaisir and all this kind of stuff. So you basically have two groups of pens, all right? You've got the Preppy and the Plaisir, and then you have the Balance and the Cool. The nib on the Preppy and the Plaisir is the same. The nib on the Balance and the Cool is the same. But the nib on the Preppy Plaisir is different than the Balance Cool. Okay? So you're asking me to compare the Cool and the Plaisir, the Plaisir and the Balance. Those have completely different nibs. However, I can talk about all of these. Now that you mentioned the Cool and the Balance have the exact same nib. It's just different color. The Plaisir and the Preppy, the only difference is the body of the pen. So if you look, I'll even zoom in a little bit because that'll help to show you. So if you look at the Plaisir and the Preppy, right? Now you can see how badly I need to shave, but the Preppy, so I'm gonna pull that off, and the Plaisir, there you go. And I grabbed the same color so that you could really see. Now the Preppy is in the process of being redesigned, so the color of the Preppy and the Plaisir nibs are gonna be changing somewhat, but up until what it's been kind of in the past so far, you can actually see the feed and is the same, and you can actually pull the nib and feed out of this pen, and it's completely identical on the two. So you can switch them, swap them, whatever you want to do. It's just the bodies of the pen that are different. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think you can even swap the grips of the pens as well between these, which is kind of cool because if you want to get an extra fine writing Plaisir, the Plaisir doesn't come in an extra fine nib. Will it actually swap? That is an interesting thing. I've never actually tested this, so I'll show you right now. Yep. Okay, so you can swap a Plaisir and Preppy grip section even. You don't even have to pull the nib. So you can switch and swap them between the two. They are identical. That's part of the economies of scale and why these pens are so affordable. So that's pretty cool, and you're able to do that. So yes, just want to make sure I put them back together well. Now let's look at the Platinum Balance and the Cool. If I pull both of these off, you'll see that these are a different design than the Preppy and the Plaisir, but they are the same, except for the Balances are all opaque colors and have gold trim. The Cool are all demonstrators and have rhodium trim. So that's pretty cool. That's cool. So the feed is different on these than it is on the Preppy and the Plaisir. They're nicer pens, you know, thicker, more durable, that kind of thing. And they will give you a more, I wouldn't call them flexible, but they can give you some line variation when you press on them on the page. I wouldn't do it all the time because it's not necessarily what they're designed for, but you can do it there. So to show you a comparison here between the Preppy Plaisir and the Platinum Cool Balance, you can see that the nib is a similar kind of shape. So if you're just quickly looking online, it might look similar to you, but the feed and everything is completely different. The feed, you know, is a whole different setup on the two pens. It's going to write a little bit differently on those, and I think the Cool and the Balance is a little bit smoother overall as well. But honestly, none of them are bad pens, so I think all of them are pretty good options for you to consider. But if you're looking for that somewhat softer writing experience, you're going to go with the Cool or the Balance. Cool. Cool. Next question. This is from Makrov on YouTube. What do you feel about the smoothness of the writing experience? For me, I like a glassy, silky, smooth writing experience. I don't enjoy feedback in the slightest. I know that a lot of times people like feedback so they can feel where they're writing. Very true. Am I strange to not enjoy even the smallest amount of feedback? I enjoy my broad TWSBI Eco because of how smooth mine is. Okay, that's very valid, and you know, Makrov, you are not alone in that. There are a lot of people that want the absolute smoothest writing experience possible. That's why you get Clairefontaine paper is some of the smoothest paper out there. That's why you use, you know, really wet, smooth writing inks, so you don't have to write with like any pressure at all, and it can be very smooth. That's why you tend towards broader nibs, because broader nibs generally tend to be smoother than fine and extra fine nibs. That's where you tend to go when you are wanting that super smooth experience. Oftentimes, nib makers or pen manufacturers will make pens that are not super glassy smooth because it's not really the middle ground. Like, there's a lot of people that want really smooth nibs. There's some people that don't like smooth nibs at all. They want nibs where you can really feel what's going on. So there's some that are kind of on different ends of the spectrum. So most pen companies kind of meet in somewhere in the middle, trying to go smooth but with a little touch of feedback. So they'll hone them and tune them to a point and then stop because they don't want super glassy, because some people might not be happy with that. So they tend to go kind of somewhere in the middle. So usually for folks like yourself who want everything to be as super glassy smooth as possible, there are some pen brands out there that have really smooth, right? With no feedback at all. You know, Visconti being one of them that tends to go on the smoother side. You know, it takes a lot more honing and tuning and stuff like that. Those pens tend to be a little more expensive. However, if you want to get some less expensive pens, they certainly have the capability of being as smooth as more expensive pens, but usually it's good to go with your own smoothing supplies, which is why we offer these at gouletpens.com. So going with a loop is a good idea at first. I didn't even mention the loop in my notes, but a loop is basically a small magnifying glass that allows you to inspect your nib tines to make sure that they're aligned. That's always a good idea before you get into smoothing anything, because if your tines are out of alignment, when you go smoothing, you're only going to smooth one side of it and it's going to go throwing your nib off. So you want to make sure that your tines are correct, and that will help you give the best foundation for smoothing as possible. If you want to actually smooth, I have videos separately on both micro mesh and Mylar paper. This is my fairly well used one that I have here, but it feels almost like leather, but it is an abrasive. So it's a very fine abrasive. But if you have a well-tuned nib, a well-aligned nib, and you want to smooth it out a bit, micro mesh is usually a good place to start. And that will just help to smooth out any rough spots that you have on there. But if you really want to get it super smooth, that's where Mylar paper comes in. Micro mesh will pretty much get it to where most pen manufacturers are tuning their nibs. Very smooth with a hint of feedback. This is 12,000 grit, which is, I don't know the equivalent of like a sandpaper grit, but it's pretty darn fine. This stuff goes even finer. I think the micro mesh here, 12,000 grit, I want to say it's somewhere around 3 microns thick in terms of the grits. So the Mylar paper, it doesn't even feel like an abrasive because it's so smooth to the hand, but it is. There's a shiny side, which is useless, and then there's a matte side, which is where the abrasive actually is. So this stuff is super fine. There's a 1 micron and a 0.3 micron. So if you really want to go smooth, you have your well-aligned nib, you've done your micro mesh, then you go to the 1 micron, which is about 3 times finer than micro mesh, and then the 0.3, which is 3 times finer than this. So you can really, you don't want to go crazy on this stuff because, you know, it's not going to, you're essentially, at this point, you're polishing the tip of the nib. You're not, sandpapering it away or anything. But that will be, and you want to use a really light hand when you do it, but those are the tools that you need, and for essentially a few dollars, you can tune whatever of your own nibs you want. Now, a nice caveat I want to say here is when you get into tuning and adjusting your own nibs, you're technically voiding the warranties on those nibs for those pens. So don't go grabbing your, whatever, Visconti Divina. There you go, very expensive pen. You don't want to go grabbing that and say, I want it to be smoother. Let me just go take it to micro mesh. Be careful when you're doing that kind of thing, because especially when you get into softer nibs and stuff like that, it can be, you need a little practice before you get into tuning it. Otherwise, it's pretty hard to like really screw up a nib with these materials, especially the Mylar. It's so gentle of an abrasive. It's really hard to do any real damage. But the micro mesh, you could if you overdo it too much. So you just want to be careful, especially if you're writing with too much pressure. You want to make sure you're writing literally with no more pressure than the weight of the pen itself when you're doing figure eights and stuff that you're doing on these. So I would definitely take something like Pilot Metropolitan or something that's relatively inexpensive. If you screw it up, it's not that big of a loss. try smoothing that out first before you go doing it with really expensive pens. And be aware that whatever you're smoothing, you're voiding your warranty, if that matters to you. So do it at your own risk, but those are the tools you need if you really want to get a smooth writing experience on all your pens. You usually have to do it yourself.